essentially, this is the point they make over and over again. It is a craft. It's not really just boring science. There's a lot of art to educational writing, so that's what I'm really going to focus on today. And there are some exercises that we'll work on. I'd also like to say ahead of time, so there are 4 sections to any scholarly writing, obviously. Introduction, methods, results, and discussion. Today I'm going to just focus on intro and discussion, which is where you make the case and where you convince the readers that your story is worth reading. Methods and results are a bit more mundane, I would say, and there's more recipes to write out your methods and results section. There's slight differences if you write about qualitative data and quantitative data, but I'm not going there for today because that could be a semester all on its own. So with that, I'd like to start the first. Oh yes, well, and you might ask me, why did I call it the art of scientific storytelling? One thing is just to talk about the craft or the art of writing. It's not just, writing, the recipe of writing, but it's really, there's an art to it. And why did I use the word scientific? Because educational writing is scientific. In contrast to what many of our hardcore scientists think, there's a lot of science, and you can't just write willy-nilly. And storytelling is you're still writing about the study, but making the storyline a lot more clear for readers. And to be very honest, if it's not, I read a lot of my clinical articles as well, and it takes a lot to go beyond the abstract, isn't it? I mean, you have to have a story. Otherwise, you're not going beyond the abstract. So therein lies the title of this talk. So with that, let's move on to the session goals. Very, very modest, 3 objectives. How can scientific storytelling elevate educational scholarship? That's the first thing, and hopefully that thread will run through this entire discussion. The second is I want to introduce you to this concept of the problem, gap, and hook heuristic. Okay, these are all words that come from the writing masterclass and the writer's craft that which I was fortunate enough to attend last year. And then the third thing is this word was new to me in terms of writing, conversation, scholarly conversation. How do you join a conversation that others are already in, and how do you convince them that you belong in the conversation? So, and I'll just tell you briefly my own journey. Yes, I wrote, but then my writing has been transformed in the last couple of years. So I'm currently almost through a PhD in health professions education at the University of Maastricht in the Netherlands. And after receiving all kinds of comments from my advisor, which said, you call this scientific? You call this scholarly? What did you mean? I mean, your reader will throw this paper. So wonderful feedback I got on the topic of feedback, but with that, I convinced myself that I'm going to learn to write, just from scratch. And I attended many courses, and I attended particularly this course that I was telling you about, which happens every year. Not cheap, but well worth it. So next slide. So I'm going to make you do some work as well. This is what we see when we talk about a research study. And we're really talking about research study, not so much perspectives or editorials or personal opinions, but really research study in education. That's what the focus is. So we want the numbers, the graphs, right, the curves, the gobbledygook, and that was a joke. Anyway, but this is where the study resides, in the data. And then, of course, in qualitative articles or research, you can have the same and transpose it to narrative, words, and you can still have diagrams and models. But that's where the study lies. Next, yeah. Do you want me to advance? I can do it, yeah. But this is what I'm here to talk to everyone about today. What is this? What I can tell those people in the room, or even outside the room, what does this tell you? How does it make you feel, this little picture? The story is coming alive. Off the page. I'm a great fan of cartoons. I spend half my life searching for cartoons that I can put into my talk. So this just spoke to me the minute I saw this cartoon, and that's exactly right. So that's what I want to focus on, and we're going to do some exercises, all right? So, and as I said before, the focus is really going to be on introduction and discussion, and I'll have you actually put pen to paper and do an exercise. So one of the things, gosh, I mean, it was less than 2 years ago, I wrote the introduction, and I fell asleep writing the introduction, never mind having someone else read it. Because what we do, what we are tempted to do or taught to do more often is we write about the topic. So my dissertation is on sociocultural theory and feedback. So I started, the first sentence was starting to define what feedback is. So when I went to this course, they said, so you mean you're making a new definition? No. So you're just recanting definition that someone has already written about. So what's the point? You're speaking to an audience of health professionals, educators, and you're just telling them about the topic. So turn the topic into the problem statement. So what is the problem? What is the problem which launched your research? That's what we're looking at. And what problem did you, and what aspect of the problem did you explore? I mean, obviously, we can't eradicate global poverty all in one sweep, but we take one aspect of it and try to work on it. And then the next question is it important? Who cares? So those are the three key questions that came out to me is restate your topic or your definition of the topic as a problem. This is a problem. The problem is important. Therefore, I'm going to study a small part of the problem and advance the field further. So that's the problem piece. The next piece is the hook. So hooking the reader. So not just saying in this study we aim to do this, that, and the other, but actually I am going to do this and save the world. Well, that's a bit of hyperbole, but a little bit of I am going to take this conversation, this problem, and then take it to the next step, convincingly, not without overstating it, obviously. So hooking the reader. So why does this problem matter to them, to the reader? And then it's the gap. So identify the knowledge. This was one thing I really learned, I would say, within the last 2 years, which is I wasn't actually writing about the gap so much, emphasizing the gap. So here's the problem, and here, this is why it's important to study, but I was not defining the gap properly. So what is known, but what is not known? And then you move on to how am I planning to fill this gap a little bit? See, everything is a hook, hooking the reader. Okay, of course, before the reader, hooking the reviewers and the editors. So identify the knowledge gap, which means you have to know the literature well, and then identify what is inadequate or maybe even inaccurate interpretation in the evidence thus far. What's missing or what's stated but probably misstated slightly. And or identify an unresolved debate. People are saying it could be this, it could be that. And then you say, I'm jumping into this conversation and I'm actually going to add to this debate or solve a part of this puzzle. And or identify something that has not been explained. Oh, this came out in our last study, but we have no idea why. And maybe you will catch on that little unresolved, that something that hasn't been explained. Okay, so maybe we won't build the whole bridge over the gap, but a small, at least a foundation. So the next thing is just introducing you to this concept of a scholarly conversation, and the reason I picked this cartoon is it's like a party. You're going in, and let's say there are people who know each other, right? They're all engaged in a wonderful, lively conversation out there, and you're the outsider. And you're now saying, I want to join the conversation. So similarly, the scholarly conversation. There's a group of people who've already contributed to the conversation, and you're the outsider jumping in, and you're now saying, I'm bringing something of value to this conversation, and I belong here. So that's the point about the scholarly conversation. And we all know about the importance of literature review, but I just took a little, I read Helen Giltro is a college professor who writes about articles. It has nothing to do with health professions education, but she writes a lot about grammar and the art of writing. And essentially she supervises PhDs. So she talks about literature review, reporting current state of knowledge about the topic that you wish to study. We know this. But then, more important, take your position in relation to other research. Do I agree? Do I disagree? Or am I in the middle and saying we need to study this more? So what is the position? And identifying ourselves as a member of that group, as I talked about the party, coming in and saying, I am a member, I need to be a member. That country club of scholarly writers. And then we may also point out deficiencies in current understanding. Take a turn in the conversation. So now we've jumped into the conversation and we take a turn as well. And construct knowledge, which is what is referred to as advancing the field. So you don't have to resolve all the problems and answer all the questions, but advance the field a little. Okay. Not replicate what other people have done. So with that, what I'd like you to do, I put Waldo in there because we're going to spot Waldo. And you have the handout. This, you have what's that?
The title of the handout.
Okay, all right. So for everyone who's outside Boston, we're going to do a little exercise now. And there is, I put together, this was a paper I was writing, so feel free to critique. Don't worry about it. And criticize as well. No problem there. So I just presented an introduction on page 1, and I call it the old version, just the introduction section. And scan through, I'll give you about 3 minutes to scan through the introduction. You don't have to read it word for word, but try to see if you can spot the problem, the gap, and the hook. Only the old version.
It's like a PowerPoint.
Is it?
Yeah. There's another.
Oh yeah, the exercise, that's the one. Okay, we are opening the exercise up for people, just to make sure. So David just sent a message to tell people what to open up, and it's titled, it's a PDF, it's titled The Art of Scientific Storytelling, and introduction section. and we are reviewing the old version, and we are trying to spot the problem, gap, and the hook, if we can. So I'm just scanning the chat box. Please let us know if you're having trouble hearing me at all. So I'm going to just get the discussion started while people are still scanning through. And anyone, well, I'll first point out to people in the room, can anybody here spot the problem?
The
Yes.
benefits and negative aspects of feedback,
Okay.
and how we can restructure for the best the purpose of the feedback.
Okay. And I will share this on the slide anyway. So, but I want to see, and sometimes it may be hard to spot the because we haven't written it with such precision, or such art or such craft. So, absolutely. Anyone else? I see eyebrows being wrinkled, then they're finding it hard to spot the problem.
Feedback strategies between used by teachers and learners and real-life feedback are not known.
Okay. So, I am going to, all right, anyone from elsewhere, outside of Boston, can you spot the problem statement in this handout, in this introduction section? And we'll see what, okay, within the room while we're chatting. Yes, someone is typing, lovely. Yeah, and you don't have to type the whole sentence. You can just say sentence starting this and dash dash dot dot dot. Not being able to tell whether feedback is useful since you don't know the relationship of the writer of the feedback to you. So we're having all kinds of opinions about what the problem statement is, and I'll tell you in the end what I meant the problem statement to be, and which is exactly what the value of clear and artful writing is going to be.
One of the way I found in RT feedbacks is that how could we have limbic resonance? Whatever I thinking, the person whom I evaluated also thinking on the same frequency.
Okay, sure.
But sometimes it doesn't match. Even if they believe they did very well,
Yes.
they don't know how to express that.
So the mismatch. Okay. So there is a Debbie Madden, right? Problem with unidirectional feedback between faculty and learners. You know what? You are the warmest of everybody so far. Just wanted to say that. So really, the problem was meant to be So feedback definitions are shifting from blah, 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 but the end of that sentence, however, that is where the problem statement is supposed to be. However, it is still commonly viewed through the lens of techniques used by feedback givers, and which is what you were alluding to as well. It's not coming from the other side. Okay? And then there's another, which we won't talk about, which actually becomes, let's look at the gap. Does that make sense now? So if I had stopped by saying feedback definitions are shifting from blah, blah, blah to this blah, 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 that's just a definition. You know, you see where the comments of my advisors came, right? And then it went to, however, it is still commonly viewed. So that is the problem. We're looking at feedback from the feedback provider, from the teacher angle. That is the problem statement. Could have been written much better, but just to tell you what the problem means. How about the gap?
Despite increasing emphasis on relationships, mind's building and coaching for growth. So that last sentence of the second.
I'm so glad you picked it up. It was very deep in there, wasn't it? Yeah, okay. But it's, so typically what we all do is we review the literature and say what have others said about this topic, and then say despite what they said and what they found, here, this is still unknown. That is the gap. So yes, there's another gap though. The strategy differences. Yeah, the end of paragraph 1. Recently, research has begun to focus on how feedback interactions build on blah, blah, blah. There's another, however, strategies used by teachers and learners to build relationships are mostly unknown. So that's the gap as well. And basically, it's restating the gap a little more, with a little more clarity to the sentence you read. They're really the same, more or less, because that's what I'm saying. So what I was instructed is we can do one of two things. We can do the problem statement and its importance, the gap, and then the hook. We can do it in different paragraphs, or there are some very, very skilled writers who do the problem, gap, and hook in the very first paragraph, and then go to the literature and more on the gap, and then the hook, and here's where, and the hook leading into the study objective. Okay, let me see. Research has begun. Yeah, absolutely. Research and perspective and assumptions match. Yeah, not being able to tell whether feedback is useful. Those are all. I think everyone's identifying the problem, but the gap usually should be more like experts have found blah 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 blah, but this is still unknown, or largely unknown, or not studied. That is what a gap sentence is like. Now, a hook has to be a little more exciting than I am going to do the study. Okay? Yeah, right. Who cares? I'm not going to read the study unless I pull you in. That's why the hook. I have to reel you in and attract you to reading this whole paper. So, to be quite honest, I don't see a hook in my next paragraph. I'm not hooking anybody. No. Yeah, it's, I would be perfectly honest and tell you that there is no hook because I did the gap and then I went into, the what is closest to the hook might be direct observation of feedback conversations could provide rich data. That might be the closest to the hook. Therefore, I am going to perform this study. But it's not very exciting. But this was my first version. Okay, now we'll go to the, let me see if anyone else says, okay. Now we'll go to page 2, which is the new version. all I want you to do is look at paragraph 1. It's the same paper being written. It's actually just finished and in the process of revision. However, this was given feedback. This was after feedback was given by these people whose articles I put up. They trashed it. It was nothing but red ink all over the paper when I got it back. So now,
How you felt about that?
fortunately, I love constructive feedback, so it's great. So read only the first paragraph. And I want to challenge you to find the problem, gap, and the hook all in the first paragraph. And those of you who are typing in the chat box, you can just say sentence beginning this is the problem statement, sentence beginning this is the gap, and sentence beginning this is the hook. So read only the first paragraph, which starts with newer constructs and ends with performance growth. Someone willing to start? Theoretical gains not translating into outcomes. Fantastic. That's exactly, that is great. Debbie. Anyone here?
Teachers and learners often tell different stories about feedback conversation.
That's also a problem. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, that could still be a problem statement, but what is the actual gap?
You're not fixing that.
Exactly. Well, what is the real gap that I'm trying to persuade all of you that I'm going to do? Without direct application and analysis. Yeah. So essentially I say research methodologies. These research methodologies have done wonderful things for our discoveries about feedback. Yep, okay, these methods alone may be inadequate. Yep, the gap indeed. Yes. I'm reading all problem in sentence 1, excellent, the research gap, and then hook is without. Yes, absolutely. This was my third or, God knows, fourth attempt. I think I stayed till midnight rewriting this. These methods alone. I think people got it. So see what clarity in writing and some artfulness in writing can bring, and this is actually, my manuscript is just being finished, and I have to shorten it a lot, and it will be submitted soon. But this is the last chapter, so-called, of my dissertation. Once this is done and revised, I send it to the evaluation committee, who then decides if I'm worthy of getting a PhD. That's where it is. But anyway, with so much feedback, that gobbledygook from the old version, which took about 3 paragraphs for me to get anywhere without being very attractive and enticing anyway, just brought it down to 1. You don't have to do this. As long as you can make a strong problem statement you can go to the gap, and then you can go to the hook, and that's fine as well. I just decided to try my hand at getting it all smushed into the first paragraph and then attracting you to read more. Okay?
Like words for gap, like however, or
despite.
okay.
Yeah. But.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the hook was without.
So if you take the hook, yeah, these methods are on. Absolutely. I think everyone's getting it. The new version has so much more clarity that you're able to recognize the problem, gap, and hook much more easily. But, you know, the hook, the without direct observation, that sentence, turn the page over and look at the study objectives. Now, the hook has to really be entrenched in what you're going to study. So I said, without direct observation, we're not going to advance the understanding. Therefore, I want to fill this gap by using the following study objectives. It's all flowing. Now it's starting to flow a little better. That was a long, but I'm telling you, introduction simply takes the longest time. At least for this paper, intro took me the longest time to write. Methods, the shortest. Results, okay. And then discussion, probably intro, discussion, results, methods. That's the length of time it took to write. Okay, back to this. How can we get back? Yeah, get back to the slide. And we don't need to go through this because you already did this. Doesn't want to seem to move. Yeah, absolutely. I think this is the new version, and everybody is in agreement with my own feelings about this paragraph. So I'm going to spend 30 seconds on this. Methods and results. Methods are the easiest section to write because you're doing it step 1 to step 10. And what did you do? One more thing about educational studies, and it's there in other studies as well, but since we're talking education, what was your justification for the study design? We don't need hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sample size, you know, that's okay, but then everything is justifiable. And particularly in the qualitative world, you have to justify. Why did you use ethnography? Why did you use grounded theory? So justification is what people ask for. And then is the explanation accessible? Meaning, if someone else, somewhere else, wanted to replicate your study, have you explained enough that they could take the methods out and then apply in their own context? Results is, they said, who are the main characters, basically, in your results? You don't have to particularly, both you have narrative data or numbers. You've seen in some studies, right? They put every number, every statistical analysis is in the results section. So you're left reeling what is really important and what's really significant. So you don't have to choose. Because based on this, go back to the introduction, your problem gap hook and the study objective, and then pick your choices data to put in the results section. So we will now move to the discussion section, and you have 3 segments of discussion. And what is in the discussion? Does your story, you started saying that you're going to add to the conversation, so you have to say, did I add to the conversation, and how did I add? You started by saying, I'm going to fill this gap. Discussion is, have you filled the gap, and how? And then you talk about limitations, okay? So, well, I wasn't able to conquer the world, but here's a small piece. And that's because this is all I could do, and that was the design limitations of the design. And there are 3 patterns of discussion storyline that we can adopt. One is coming full circle. So you started the introduction and then reviewed the literature, and then you try to bring it back together. Okay, others said this was the gap, I wanted to study this and narrow the gap. Did I do that? That's coming full circle. Others said this, it was unexplained or not very well explained, and I'm going to explain it with my study, deep exploration. Surprise insight. I started by wanting to do this, but boy, I discovered something that came as a total surprise, but this is what's important, even more than what I set out to do. That's a surprise insight. So now going back to page 3, can they see this or no? Page 3 of the handout. So I've given you 3 discussions. Discussion 1, 2, and 3. Let's start with discussion 1. It shouldn't take long to read. Just let's scan through it very quickly and then say, which one of these storylines does this follow? Coming full circle, deep exploration, or surprise insight?
Deep exploration. I'd say number 2.
Number 2, okay. And again, there's no right or wrong answer. So how many for number 1? You could just say, is discussion 1, number 1, number 2, or number 3? And then we'll discuss that. So I gave the intro just because I wanted to ground you in what this study was about. So I have a number 1, 1, 3, 2, I've got everything. And that's perfectly fine, but I'll explain in a second. Any other votes here for number 1? 1, 2, 1. Or just pick a number. 1/3 of the time you're going to be right. 1. Yes, I have a 1. No, coming full circle. You don't solve, but essentially you're bringing the story to an end. Yeah, you've gone deeper necessarily, or you go for 1. Okay, 1. I have, fabulous. Everybody from outside of Boston seems to be almost unanimous. And I agree. Okay, I'm going to go with the majority here and call it 1, and I'll tell you why. So essentially, the Johari window is a psychological framework for conversations between people, and then how self-awareness applies in a conversation, okay? So I wanted to see how the feedback conversations or opinions expressed by faculty and residents fit into the self-awareness framework. And at the end, in the discussion, I'm saying, I think it did, because from their narrative, it seemed to fit, and the window, this framework is a good framework to use in feedback conversations. So that's coming full circle. I haven't made any surprise discovery, so it's not 3. Yes, the confusion is between 1 and 2, but I haven't made any deep explorations of something that's already known. Get it? That's why it's not number 2. Yeah. So let's go to discussion 2. So we're now going to discussion 2 and assigning number 1, 2, or 3 to it. And there should be clues in the intro already. see Debbie, actually, Barbara, Teresa, Peter. No, Peter was from the last group, I think. Cheryl. Two. Okay. Any disagreement with two? All right. So it's, there's a clue, and it's great. I think we have a consensus here. So there's a clue in the introduction. We wish to do this. We wish to further explore something that came out of the previous study, and therefore it is a deep exploration. And this paper, just so you know, is going to be coming out in academic medicine probably in a week or two. The early online version has come out, and essentially the first paper, that was a sort of a qualitative, open-ended exploration about what our residents thought about the feedback culture in the department. And then the second paper was they said something, but had no idea what it meant because I wasn't expecting that. And so this was a deep dive into, and then I went into all kinds of psychological theories, which you'll be happy to hear, and politeness theory and organizational culture, and that's what's coming out in academic medicine. The paper about the Johari window, then again, back to you, David, if you'd be happy. I read all about the Johari window of self-awareness in personal interaction and said, how does this matter? If feedback is just two people conversing with each other, let me see how I can export that framework. And that was out in Medical Teacher. Now the last, going to discussion 3, is it 1, 2, or 3? You've all become experts, actually. And there is a clue here because the intro, the study lists the study objectives, but the discussion.
The word ironically.
Yeah. Exactly. So what would you go with?
Right.
Yep.
So these are separate papers.
Separate papers.
I think so.
So you're going with 3? Surprise insight. So I'll tell you what it was. This is published in Teaching and Learning in Medicine, which essentially I'm going in and saying, what do you think of feedback? How does our institution facilitate or impede feedback? Sitting there, all of a sudden, it's like people are too nice. I wasn't expecting that. We want people to be nice, but it also makes people not be honest, and therefore no constructive. So, and it was, you are right, it's surprise insight because it's the first time it was written about feedback. And so people are now reading my work and emailing me out of the blue, and I feel pretty good that I found something. So this was indeed 3. Okay? We're not going to go through, given the time, we have 10 minutes. Okay, we'll very quickly go through the grammar part. Where can we, we have to go back and forth. Okay, so essentially I'm hoping I've convinced everyone that the story begins in the introduction and ends in the discussion. In between, you're providing what we did and then what we found, which is less of the story, but the story comes out at the end. Okay, what did we do to tell the story? What did we find? And therefore, what is the end of the story? So that is about writing. Yep, I think you had it all. And and I want to finish with one last thing, and you can go home and do the exercises on the other pages. So one thing that I was always finding challenging is when I was writing, I just went on and on and on trying to correct the grammar as I was writing. And I never got anywhere because I was reading the same sentence about 50 times and correcting it, and I hadn't gone to the next sentence. So one thing I learned, and I found it easier, forget the grammar. The first time around, forget the grammar, get the story told. So editing levels, I used to go in the reverse. Now I learned and I go in this order because at least the manuscript gets written this way. So think of the paper as a whole. Make sure it's flowing and there is a logic to it and it tells the story. Think of the story you're telling. Does it need telling? Who cares? So that's the first, balcony view. Finish that and then go paragraph to paragraph. And paragraph meaning is each paragraph focusing on a topic or a concept, and is it leading into the next paragraph? Are people warned about what is coming? Is there a link sentence at the end of the paragraph to jump off to the next paragraph? So it's like a story, right? J.K. Rowling. I'm a Harry Potter fan, so J.K. Rowling stuff. And so the connection is there. A topic sentence starts the paragraph, and the link sentence is at the end of the paragraph. But the paragraph is all about one concept. Finally, go down into the sentences, sentence by sentence. What type of sentence do you want to write? Do you want to write a simple sentence, a compound sentence? Compound sentence is more like there are two concepts in the same sentence. They are co-dominant, and if you broke up the sentence, they could each stand independent. Or do you want a complex sentence, like despite the blah, 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 comma, something happened. So the two sentences, there is one dominant part and one is dependent on the other, but they can't stand. I can't say despite the fact that so much work on feedback has been done, full stop, won't stand. Okay, so the two segments of the sentence cannot stand together. So the types of sentence, and each one has emphasis depending on the point we're trying to make. Then go into the construction of the sentence. I was advised that as close as you can bring the subject of the sentence to the beginning is better, because I read a sentence about competency-based education, which was, since competency-based blah 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 is important, blah 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 blah, about 3 lines of it, and then the resident. So the subject was buried somewhere. So what is this about? Residency education, student education, faculty development, interprofessional education? What is it? So bring the subject, drag it as close as possible to the beginning. And then active and passive. We are always told write the abstracts, people say write in a passive voice. The rest of the story, methods especially, do mostly active. But there are some times where in the discussions when we use passive voice, when we don't want to assign blame or say something is wrong, inaccurate, or blame, this happened because someone is to blame, then you can detach, you can create distance by writing the sentence in a passive voice. Okay, the last thing to look at is the verbs. And again, you can, I have some examples and you can go home and work on it using strong verbs. To be verbs, we define, we describe, so pale and pathetic. We argue, we debate, we emphasize, become stronger. Of course, without overstating what you're trying to do. So strong verbs are generally recommended. So exercise for us would be, write up your first draft anyway, and then go back and see if, based on your results section, we can actually make the word stronger, but not overselling, and it's going beyond our results. So that's the editing level. And with that, I will bring the session to a close. Thank you everyone for joining us from around the country. Really wish we could have had video, but I'm sure eventually somebody's 5-year-old will come in and make it work just like that. We're all over 5 and we don't have the talent.
So thank you all for joining us. Today we'll be uploading the presentation. Thank you again, Dr. Ravani, for joining us today.
And thanks for your comments, and you're welcome.